Every night, a 7-year-old girl stood beneath a broken station clock, waiting for a promise that time refused to keep. A billionaire noticed her silence and chose not to move her. What followed wasn't a rescue, but a series of quiet choices that turned waiting into family. The clock above Platform 4 had stopped months ago. Everyone who passed through the station knew it. Everyone except the little girl standing beneath it. Her name was Ivy Moore. She was 7 years old, small for her age, wrapped in a faded winter coat that once belonged to someone else. Each evening, just before sunset, she stood in the same spot, shoes aligned neatly with a crack in the floor, hands hidden inside sleeves too long for her arms. Her eyes never left the clock. 6:42. That was the time her mother had set it. Wait here. I'll come back when the big hand reaches the top. The big hand never moved. Trains arrived and departed. Wind rushed through the station carrying voices, footsteps, and the metallic echo of announcements. People hurried past Ivy without noticing her stillness, mistaking it for confidence or worse, belonging. But Ivy didn't belong to the station. She belonged to a promise. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She didn't sit down. She stood because standing felt closer to being found. When hunger tightened in her stomach, she pressed her palm against it and whispered what her mother always said. It's okay. Waiting is not the same as being alone. Above her, the frozen clock ticked in silence. Below it, Ivy waited, certain that time itself would keep its word. Ethan Vale had walked through that station hundreds of times. He was 37 years old, known in headlines as a billionaire innovator who built systems to predict human behavior. He could read markets before they moved, anticipate failures before they happened. Yet that night, it was a child who stopped him. He noticed her because she wasn't moving. In a place built for motion, rolling suitcases, rushing crowds, blinking signs, stillness felt wrong. Ethan slowed his steps, watching from a distance as the girl stood beneath the clock. Her gaze fixed upward, her posture careful and deliberate. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't searching faces. She looked prepared. Ethan's first instinct was to intervene. His second was to wait. He remembered how assumptions could cause harm, how help offered too quickly could feel like control. So he did what he had learned to do best, he observed. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No one came for her. Ethan checked the clock and frowned. The hands hadn't moved. Something settled uncomfortably in his chest. Not fear, not suspicion, but responsibility. He didn't see neglect. He saw trust stretched thin. Finally, he approached, keeping his voice low, his body angled away so he wouldn't loom. Hey there, he said gently. Are you waiting for someone? The girl turned her head slightly, enough to see him, not enough to lose sight of the clock. Yes, she said. Her voice was calm. Certain. For your mom? She nodded once. Ethan followed her gaze upward. 6:42. That was when he realized this wasn't a child who had been forgotten. This was a child who believed. Ethan crouched a few steps away, careful not to cross an invisible line. How long have you been waiting? He asked. Ivy thought for a moment. Since the light outside turned orange, it was already dark. She said she'd come back when the clock says 6:42. Ivy continued as if explaining something obvious. She always comes back. Ethan swallowed. He looked up at the clock again. The paint around its edges was cracked. The second hand was gone entirely. Anyone who worked there knew it hadn't been fixed because it wasn't considered urgent. To Ethan, it suddenly felt urgent. Did your mom tell you to stay right here? He asked. Yes, Ivy said. This is our place. Our place. The word struck him harder than any accusation could have. I can wait with you, Ethan offered carefully. Ivy shook her head. She said to wait alone. But thank you. Thank you. Not fear. Not mistrust. just boundaries taut with love. Ethan stood slowly stepping back instead of closer. He understood now that helping her didn't mean moving her. It meant protecting the promise that held her upright. Across the station, he quietly spoke to a security officer, not to report the child, not to remove her, but to make sure nothing would interrupt what mattered most. As Ethan returned to his place nearby, Ivy looked back up at the clock, her eyes steady. Time hadn't moved, but hope had not left. Ethan didn't leave the station. He stood near a column across the platform, far enough to give Ivy space, close enough to notice if anything changed. From where he was, he could see her small silhouette beneath the clock, perfectly aligned with the shadow it cast on the wall. People continued to pass her. Some glanced. Most didn't. Ethan noticed patterns before others did. That was his skill. And the pattern here was simple and troubling. No adult approached her with recognition. No familiar face appeared in the crowd. Still, he didn't move her. He remembered her words. "This is our place." Instead, he made one careful decision. He contacted the station's on-duty family services liaison, a role designed not to remove children, but to ensure safety when guardians were delayed. He was precise with his words. "There's a child waiting for a parent," he said quietly. "She's calm. She's not lost. I just want to make sure no one interferes." The liaison agreed to observe from a distance. No uniforms, no questions, no pressure. Across the platform, Ivy shifted her weight for the first time. She didn't step away from the clock. She simply adjusted, as if her legs had reminded her they were human. She rubbed her hands together, then tucked them back into her sleeves. Ethan felt a flicker of doubt. What if he was wrong? What if waiting was causing harm he couldn't see? He watched closely for signs, tears, panic, confusion. There were none. Instead, Ivy reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it carefully against her knee, then held it against her chest lips, moving in a whisper only she could hear. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he understood the gesture. It was something rehearsed, something repeated. A ritual meant to keep fear away. Minutes passed, then more. Just as Ethan considered stepping closer again, he noticed something new, a woman standing near the station entrance, frozen in place, eyes locked on the clock. She looked exhausted and terrified, and she was looking for someone. Ethan's heart tightened. The waiting, he realized, might finally be ending. The woman at the entrance didn't move at first. She stood just inside the station doors, coat still open, despite the cold breath, uneven as if she had run part of the way. Her eyes searched the space once, then again, until they landed on the clock above platform 4. 6:42. Her shoulders dropped. Lena Moore pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back the sound that threatened to escape. She had imagined this moment in pieces, fear first, then relief, but seeing her daughter exactly where she had promised struck her with a force she hadn't prepared for. Ivy hadn't moved. Lena took one step forward, then stopped herself. She knew better than to rush. Panic could frighten a child who had waited too long. She crossed the distance slowly, every step measured her gaze, never leaving Ivy's back. Ethan noticed the shift before Ivy did. The woman's posture told him everything: exhaustion, urgency, love restrained by guilt. This was not abandonment. This was someone who had been late against her will. When Ivy finally turned, it was as if the station faded. "Mom," she said. Not loud. Certain. Lena knelt immediately, arms open but careful, waiting for Ivy to step forward. Ivy did, pressing into her mother's coat, as if fitting into a space that had been missing all evening. "I waited," Ivy whispered. "I know," Lena said, voice breaking. "You always do." Ethan looked away, giving them privacy. Around them, the station continued to move, unaware that something sacred had just been kept intact. After a moment, Lena looked up and noticed him. She stood instinctively, placing herself slightly in front of Ivy, not in fear, but in protection. "Did you?" she began, uncertain. "I didn't move her," Ethan said quickly. "I just made sure she was safe." Lena studied him, then nodded once. "Thank you," she said. The clock above them remained frozen, but for the first time that night, it no longer felt broken. They didn't leave right away. Lena kept one hand on Ivy's shoulder, as if grounding herself while Ivy stayed close, her fingers curled into the edge of her mother's coat. The moment had passed, but its echo lingered, relief mixed with something heavier. Ethan remained a few steps back, giving them space. He had learned that distance could be a form of respect. "I'm sorry I'm late," Lena said softly, brushing Ivy's hair back. The shift changed again. Ivy nodded. "I know. That was all. No questions, no blame." Ethan noticed it immediately, the way Ivy didn't ask why, only if her mother was here, if the promise still stood. Lena exhaled slowly, then looked at Ethan again. This time her gaze was steadier. "She always waits," Lena said, as if explaining something important. "I told her this clock was our anchor, so she wouldn't be afraid." Ethan glanced up at the clock, then back at Lena. He chose his words carefully. "Do you work nearby?" Lena hesitated. Not long, just enough to reveal a habit of weighing consequences. "I work nights," she said. "Contract cleaning. It's unpredictable." Unpredictable. Ethan heard the word for what it was. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing a delay on the late train. Lena flinched, then relaxed when she realized it wasn't relevant. "I should have been here earlier," she said, "but sometimes leaving early isn't allowed." That sentence landed quietly. No accusation, no drama, just truth. Ethan felt the shape of something forming, a question he wasn't supposed to ask, a line he wasn't supposed to cross. He had resources, influence, but also responsibility. "I don't want to interfere," he said. "But if there's ever a time you need support, there are legal ways to make work safer, more predictable." Lena studied him. Not with suspicion, she had no energy for that, but with the caution of someone who had learned that help often came with conditions. "I don't want trouble," she said gently. "Neither do I," Ethan replied. "That's why I ask before acting." Ivy looked up at him, then her expression curious. "You waited too," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." For the first time that night, the three of them stood beneath the broken clock together, linked not by time, but by a shared understanding. Some promises, Ethan realized, didn't need fixing. They needed protecting. They walked out of the station together, not as a group, but as three people moving at the same pace. Outside, the city was quieter. Streetlights reflected off damp pavement, and the air carried the low hum of traffic drifting in from a distance. Ivy stayed close to her mother, but she kept glancing back just enough to make sure Ethan was still there. Ethan noticed. He stayed a step behind, hands visible, posture open. He had learned long ago that kindness, when rushed, could feel like pressure. At the curb, Lena stopped. "Our bus comes here," she said. It wasn't a dismissal, it was information. Ethan nodded. "Then I'll stop here." Ivy looked from her mother to him, uncertain. She hadn't expected the story to end so quickly. The bus was late. Again. Minutes passed. Lena shifted her weight, fatigue settling back into her shoulders now that the tension had released. Ivy sat on the bench, swinging her feet, slowly counting the cracks in the sidewalk. Ethan remained nearby, far enough not to intrude, close enough to help if needed. That was when Ivy spoke. "Do you wait for people often?" she asked him. Ethan smiled softly. "Not usually, but tonight you did." "Yes." Why, Ethan thought carefully. "Because sometimes waiting tells you what matters." Ivy considered this, then nodded, satisfied. A gust of wind blew down the street. Lena pulled her coat tighter around Ivy, then hesitated. I don't mean to ask, she said quietly, eyes on the road, but you don't work here, do you? No, Ethan replied. I was just passing through. Lena studied his face. There was no urgency in him, no expectation. I don't like asking for help, she said. I know, Ethan said gently. That's why I didn't offer it. She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time something softened. The bus headlights appeared at the end of the street. Ivy stood adjusting her coat. Thank you for waiting, she said. Ethan nodded. You're welcome. As the bus pulled to the curb, Ethan felt the pull to say more, to fix something, to change something. But he resisted. Not yet. Some stories he knew needed time to reveal where help truly belonged. The bus ride was quiet. Ivy sat by the window, her breath fogging the glass, as the city slid past in blurred streaks of light. Lena held the rail with one hand, the other resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder. She didn't relax completely, not yet, but the tight edge had softened. 2 stops and Ivy reached into her coat pocket. She unfolded the piece of paper she had held so carefully at the station. The edges were worn, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. She smoothed it against her knee just as she always did. Lena noticed. You still have that? She asked gently. Ivy nodded. You gave it to me. Lena's throat tightened. She remembered writing it in a rush weeks ago during a morning when everything felt unstable. What does it say? Ethan asked quietly from the seat across the aisle. He hadn't meant to intrude, but Ivy was already turning the paper toward him. It's my instructions, Ivy said seriously. She read it aloud carefully, sounding each word. Wait under the big clock. If I'm late, I'm still coming. You are safe. I love you more than time. The bus rattled over a bump. For a moment, no one spoke. Ethan felt something settle heavily and clearly in his chest. This wasn't improvisation. This wasn't neglect covered by hope. This was preparation love shaped into rules a child could hold on to. Lena looked away, embarrassed and proud at the same time. I didn't want her to be scared, she said. So I made it simple. You made it strong, Ethan replied. Ivy folded the paper again and slipped it back into her pocket. I read it when the clock doesn't move, she said. That sentence stayed with Ethan. When the bus stopped near their building, Lena stood and guided Ivy toward the door. Before stepping off, she hesitated and turned back. You didn't have to stay, she said to Ethan. I know, he answered. She nodded, accepting that. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Ivy turned one last time. The clock didn't move, she said, but it was still right. Ethan watched them walk away, mother and daughter, framed by the streetlights, aware now that what he had witnessed wasn't a problem to solve. It was a system that needed protecting, and systems Ethan knew could be strengthened legally carefully without breaking what already worked. The story, he realized, wasn't over. It was just beginning to ask the right questions. Ethan didn't go home after the bus disappeared. He returned to his office instead, a quiet space high above the city, where glass walls reflected lights that never slept. Normally, this was where problems became data, where patterns revealed themselves if you stared long enough. Tonight, one sentence followed him like a shadow. Sometimes leaving early isn't allowed. Ethan sat at his desk and opened a blank document. He didn't type names, he typed questions. Who schedules night shifts with no fixed end time? Who changes hours without notice? Who benefits when workers feel they can't say no? By midnight, he had answers, at least partial ones. Contract cleaning companies, temporary labor firms, flexible agreements that were anything but. He called in a favor the next morning, then another. Quiet calls, lawful calls, no threats, no pressure, just requests for information that should have existed already. That was when he noticed something strange. There was no formal employee file under Lena Moore, no consistent hours, no recorded overtime, no documented breaks. Legally, that absence mattered. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't about rescuing anyone. This was about structure failing the people who relied on it. 2 days later, he found himself back near the station, not to watch Ivy, but to wait for Lena. When she arrived, she looked tired but composed, Ivy's backpack slung over her shoulder as she walked her daughter toward a nearby community center before her shift. Ethan approached carefully, stopping well outside their space. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said. "I've been thinking about what you told me." Lena stiffened slightly. "I don't want trouble." "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why I didn't file anything. I just looked." She studied him wary. "There are protections you're entitled to," he continued. "Predictable hours, proper documentation. None of it requires conflict. And if I ask for those things," Lena asked quietly, "then you wouldn't be asking for help," Ethan said. "You'd be asserting your rights." Ivy looked between them, sensing the shift. "Is this about waiting?" she asked. Ethan met her eyes. "It's about making sure you don't have to wait alone." Lena was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Tell me," she said, but slowly. Ethan smiled faintly. Some changes he knew had to move at the speed of trust. They met in a small community office near the station, the kind of place with donated furniture and bulletin boards, layered with handwritten flyers. It was neutral ground, safe, familiar, unremarkable. Ethan chose it on purpose. Lena sat across from him at a round table, Ivy coloring quietly beside her. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. No suits, no raised voices, just conversation. "I don't want to accuse anyone," Lena said first. "I just want to work and come home." "That's exactly the point," Ethan replied. "The law is designed for that outcome." He laid out the information carefully, one piece at a time. He explained predictable scheduling laws, the requirement for written notice when shifts changed, the obligation to document hours worked. He avoided language that sounded like conflict. He spoke in terms of protection. Ivy listened without looking up. "And if they say no," Lena asked. "They can't," Ethan said calmly. "Not without correcting the records. And correction doesn't mean punishment. It means compliance." Lena absorbed this slowly. She had learned not to trust explanations that sounded too simple. "I've seen people lose work for less," she said. "That's why this goes through the right channels," Ethan answered. "A labor advocate, mediation, no confrontation, no risk to you or your daughter." Ivy finally looked up. "Does this change the clock?" Ethan smiled gently. "It changes the waiting." That afternoon, a formal inquiry was filed quietly, professionally. No names attached publicly, no drama, just a request for documentation that should have been there all along. Within a week, the response came. Revised schedules, guaranteed end times, a written agreement. No one was blamed. No one was punished. But suddenly, Lena's shifts ended when they were supposed to. The first evening she arrived at the station early, Ivy noticed immediately. "You're here before the light turns orange," she said, surprised. Lena knelt, holding her close. "I told you I'd come back," she whispered. "Now I can prove it." From a distance, Ethan watched not as an architect of change, but as someone who had stepped aside once the system began to work. The clock above Platform 4 was still broken. But beneath it, time had finally started to behave differently. And for the first time, Ethan wondered what it would mean not just to protect a system, but to belong inside one. Ethan expected to disappear after that. The work was done. The structure had shifted. Lena no longer needed an intermediary, and Ivy no longer waited beneath a frozen clock. By every practical measure, the story should have ended there. But it didn't. They kept crossing paths naturally without planning. At the station cafe on nights, Lena finished early. At the community center when Ivy stayed late for reading hour. Small intersections that felt accidental but slowly stopped being surprising. Ethan never brought paperwork, never mentioned contracts. He asked about Ivy's favorite books instead. Ones where people come back, she said. Lena noticed the consistency before she noticed the comfort. Ethan didn't overstep. He didn't offer solutions that hadn't been requested. He simply showed up when he said he would. That mattered. One evening, the three of them sat at a corner table sharing soup from mismatched bowls. Ivy talked about school, about a science project she wanted to build with real wires. Ethan listened like nothing else existed. "You don't have to stay," Lena said at one point, not unkindly. "I know," Ethan replied. "I want to." The words landed differently than help ever had. Weeks passed, then months. The broken clock was fixed. Someone finally replaced the missing hand. It ticked now, loudly, insistently. Ivy noticed immediately. "It moves," she said, surprised. "Yes," Lena smiled, "but you don't have to watch it anymore." Ethan watched Ivy instead, how she laughed more easily now, how she leaned into silence without fear. He realized that the promise she had held so tightly had widened. It had room for more people now. One night as they walked home together, Ivy slipped her hand into Ethan's without thinking. He froze for half a second, then relaxed, allowing it. Lena saw it. She didn't pull Ivy away. Instead, she said quietly, "She doesn't do that with just anyone." Ethan nodded, aware of the weight of that trust. In that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. He hadn't saved a family. He had been invited into one. And invitations, he knew, carried responsibilities far deeper than rescue ever could. The question didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces between shared dinners, during walks home from the community center, in the quiet moments when Ivy did homework at the kitchen table, and Ethan sat nearby pretending not to watch. One evening, Ivy looked up from her notebook and asked, "Do you have a place where people wait for you?" Ethan paused. "I do," he said honestly, "but it's very quiet." Ivy nodded, considering this. "Ours used to be quiet too." Lena felt the shift before Ethan did. Not fear, awareness. This was no longer about schedules or systems. It was about attachment, and attachment required clarity. Later that night, after Ivy had fallen asleep, Lena poured 2 cups of tea and set one across from Ethan. "She's getting attached," Lena said gently. "I know," Ethan replied. "I need to be sure," she continued, choosing each word carefully, "that if she lets you in, it won't be temporary." Ethan didn't answer right away. He had learned that some questions deserved more than reassurance. "I won't promise what I can't legally and emotionally sustain," he said at last. "But if I stay correctly." Lena met his eyes. "What does that mean to you?" "It means boundaries," Ethan said, "and structure. It means understanding what role I'm allowed to have and which ones require consent time and law." The word law didn't frighten Lena. It steadied her. The next week, they met with a family counselor, not to decide anything but to understand options. Guardianship, long-term partnership. What stability looked like on paper, not just in feeling. Ethan listened more than he spoke. When Ivy was invited into part of the conversation, the counselor asked her a simple question. "Who do you feel safe with?" Ivy didn't hesitate. "My mom," she said. Then she looked at Ethan, and him, but differently. Everyone smiled. No one rushed her. Weeks turned into a rhythm. Ethan didn't move in. He didn't insert himself into decisions. He showed up consistently, predictably, like a second hand that kept time without demanding attention. One night, Ivy asked the question no one else had. "Are you going to leave when I stop waiting?" Ethan knelt in front of her, eye-level voice steady. "No," he said. "If I ever become part of your life, it will be because everyone chose it, and because the law agrees it's safe." Ivy thought about this, so, "Waiting isn't scary anymore?" she asked. "No," Ethan said softly. "Now waiting means building." From the hallway, Lena watched them, aware that love alone wasn't enough. and grateful that this time love was being guided by responsibility. Some families, she realized, weren't formed by rescue. They were formed by patience, consent, and the courage to do things the right way, even when the heart was ready sooner. The day everything felt ordinary was the day Lena realized how much had changed. There was no crisis that morning, no late shift, no rushing through the station with her breath caught in her throat. She woke Ivy on time, made breakfast without watching the clock, and walked her to school beneath a sky that looked undecided but calm. Ethan met them later at the cafe near the corner, not because he was needed, but because it was Thursday, and Thursdays had quietly become theirs. Ivy waved when she saw him, then went back to her drawing without interruption. "She doesn't stop what she's doing anymore," Lena said softly. "She used to freeze when someone arrived." "That means she expects people to stay," Ethan replied. The counselor had said the same thing a week earlier. Stability didn't announce itself. It revealed itself in small freedoms, children who no longer monitored exits, adults who no longer rehearsed explanations. After school, Ivy asked if Ethan could come with them to the library. "Only if Mom says yes," she added automatically. Lena smiled. "Yes is fine." At the library, Ivy wandered ahead, confident choosing books she didn't finish sitting where she wanted. Ethan and Lena watched her from a distance, sharing silence that felt earned. "I've been thinking," Lena said eventually, "about what comes next." Ethan didn't interrupt. "I don't want to erase her father," she continued. "And I don't want to rush labels that don't fit yet." "I wouldn't ask you to," Ethan said. "That's why I trust you," she replied. Later that evening, they cooked together. Ivy set the table with care, lining up the plates just right. Halfway through dinner, she stopped chewing and frowned. "Why does it feel like this is normal?" she asked. Lena laughed quietly. Ethan paused. "Because it's allowed to be," he said. Ivy considered that. "I like normal." After dinner, Ivy asked to show Ethan something. She led him to her room and pulled a folded paper from her drawer, the same note from the station, now smoothed, almost flat. "I don't need this anymore," she said. Ethan didn't take it. "You don't have to give it away." "I know," Ivy said. "I just don't have to hold it all the time." She placed it in a small box beneath her bed and closed the lid. From the doorway, Lena watched her chest tight, with something like relief and grief combined. The waiting had shaped her daughter. Letting go would shape her too. That night, after Ivy fell asleep, Lena and Ethan sat at the kitchen table again. "I'm ready to talk about the future," Lena said. "Not promises, plans." Ethan nodded. "Then we do it with professionals, with paperwork, with room for Ivy to say no at any point." Lena reached for his hand. This time she didn't pull back. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Somewhere clocks ticked. Somewhere they didn't. But in that apartment, nothing went wrong. And that, Lena realized, was no small miracle. It was the beginning of a life built not on waiting, but on choosing every day to stay. The paperwork took longer than any of them expected. Not because anyone was resisting, because care, when done properly, moved slowly. Forms were reviewed. Meetings were scheduled. Questions were asked more than once, not out of doubt, but out of responsibility. Ivy knew something was happening. She noticed the way adults lowered their voices, the way Ethan carried a folder instead of his laptop, the way her mother checked calendars instead of clocks. One afternoon, Lena sat beside Ivy on the couch. "There are some grown-up conversations happening," she said carefully. "Nothing changes unless you're comfortable." Ivy looked up from her book. "Am I in trouble?" No, Lena said immediately. "You're safe. This is about making sure you stay that way." Ivy thought for a moment. "Is Ethan staying?" Ethan, who had been standing near the window, turned slowly. "If you want me to," he said, "and if your mom agrees, and if the people whose job it is to protect kids agree too." "That's a lot of people," Ivy said. "Yes," Ethan smiled. because you matter to all of them. They met with a family counselor again, then a legal advisor whose office felt warmer than expected plants near the windows chairs arranged in a circle instead of across a desk. No one talked about rescue. They talked about guardianship options, about long-term commitment, about what it meant to add a person to a family without taking anyone away. Ethan listened. Lena asked questions. Ivy colored. At one point, the advisor turned to Ivy. "How do you feel about Ethan being part of your family?" Ivy didn't answer right away. She drew one more line, then looked up. "He doesn't make me wait," she said. "He comes back." The room went quiet, not heavy, just attentive. "That's important," the advisor said gently. Weeks later, the decision was written down not as an ending but as a structure shared guardianship reviewed annually, built with consent and safeguards. No pressure, no permanence forced, just a framework that allowed love to stay. The day the documents were signed, Ivy wore her favorite sweater. Lena held the pen with steady hands. Ethan signed last. Nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no tears, just relief. That evening, they walked past the station together. The clock above Platform 4 ticked loudly, now newly repaired. Ivy glanced at it once, then kept walking. "We don't need that place anymore," she said. Lena squeezed her hand. Ethan walked on Ivy's other side. "But we can still visit," Ethan said. "If you ever want to remember." Ivy nodded. "Remembering is okay." As they crossed the street, Ivy reached up and took both their hands at once. Neither adult let go. For the first time, waiting wasn't something Ivy did alone. It was something she had outgrown without losing what it taught her. And for Ethan and Lena, choosing had become more than a feeling. It had become a promise they were now allowed and ready to keep. They didn't announce it. No posts, no photos, no explanations offered to anyone who didn't need one. Life simply adjusted itself quietly and steadily around the three of them. Ethan didn't move in all at once. He kept his apartment for months, sleeping there on some nights, returning in the mornings with groceries or library books Ivy had asked for the night before. Lena noticed how carefully he respected the rhythm of the home, never assuming, never rearranging what wasn't his. That mattered more than grand gestures ever could. Ivy noticed, too. She began introducing him differently. "This is Ethan," she told a teacher one afternoon. "Not my dad, not my mom's friend. Just Ethan," and that was enough. On weekends, they cooked together. Ivy learned how to crack eggs without breaking the yolk. Ethan learned how to wait while Ivy explained every step twice. Lena watched them from the doorway, sometimes struck by how safe it felt to let someone else take up space. One evening during dinner, Ivy paused and asked, "Do families always live together?" "No," Lena said. "Families live in ways that work." Ethan nodded. "And they can change if everyone agrees." Ivy considered this. "I like how this works." Later that night, after Ivy had gone to bed, Lena and Ethan sat at the kitchen table again, fewer documents this time, more silence. "I've never done this before," Lena said. Not slowly. Ethan smiled. "Neither have I." She reached for his hand, resting her fingers there without tension. "We didn't save each other," she said. "We just stopped rushing." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "That might be the most responsible thing we've ever done." Weeks turned into a season. The station became just another place they passed. The clock faded into memory. Ivy no longer counted minutes. She counted books, birthdays, small plans for the future. One afternoon, Ivy came home from school with a drawing. It showed 3 figures standing under a clock, but this time the clock was in the background, small and unimportant. The figures were holding hands facing forward. "I drew us," Ivy said. Lena felt her eyes sting. Ethan swallowed. "Is it okay?" Ivy asked. "Yes," Lena said softly. "It's more than okay." Ethan knelt beside her. "It's perfect." That night, as Ivy slept, Lena placed the drawing on the refrigerator. not as a declaration, but as a reminder. Their family hadn't been formed by urgency or rescue or obligation. It had been formed by patience, by consent, by showing up again and again without asking the clock for permission. And in that quiet apartment, where no one was waiting anymore, the future finally felt wide open, not because everything was solved, but because everything that mattered was now shared. The apartment changed before anyone officially moved. It happened in small ways: an extra toothbrush in the bathroom cup, a second pair of shoes by the door that no one tripped over anymore. Ethan's presence settled into the space, not as an addition, but as an alignment. Neighbors noticed first. Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs smiled longer in the hallway. The building manager started addressing emails to the Moorvale household without being corrected. No one asked questions out loud. People rarely did when something felt right. Ethan began staying over more often, still careful, still asking. He slept lightly at first, waking early, as if afraid to take too much space. Lena noticed and teased him gently. "You're allowed to rest," she said one morning. "I'm learning," he replied. Ivy noticed something else. The house responded differently when Ethan was there. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt held. One evening, while Lena cooked, Ivy tugged Ethan into the hallway. "The door doesn't scare me anymore," she whispered. Ethan crouched. "Why did it scare you before?" "Because it closed," she said. "Now it opens." Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with responsibility. This wasn't about being present. It was about being predictable. Later that night, Lena brought out a small folder. "It's not urgent," she said. "But if you're going to be here more, there are forms. Emergency contact updates. School permissions." Ethan nodded. "I'll sign what I'm allowed to." That sentence mattered. They filled out the paperwork together at the kitchen table. No rush, no assumptions. Ivy sat nearby, drawing circles and connecting them with careful lines. "What are those?" Lena asked. "Paths," Ivy said, "so people don't get lost." At school, Ivy began to change too. She raised her hand more, stayed for activities. When a teacher asked who to call in an emergency, Ivy answered confidently, listing 2 names instead of 1. That afternoon, Ethan waited outside the school gates, watching Ivy run toward him without hesitation. Lena arrived moments later, breathless, smiling. "I didn't panic today," she said quietly. "I knew someone would be there." They walked home together, Ivy between them, swinging their hands. At the corner, Ivy stopped suddenly. "Do we live together now?" she asked. Lena looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Ivy. "We're building toward it," Lena said. "And building takes time," Ethan added. Ivy nodded, satisfied. That night, as Ethan turned off the lights, he realized something unexpected. The house had learned their names, not because they had claimed it, but because they had earned its trust, room by room, form by form, promise by promise. And in that learning, a family wasn't just forming. It was settling, finally allowed to stay. The storm arrived without warning. Not the kind that flooded streets or shattered windows, just heavy rain, steady and relentless, turning the city into a blur of reflections and sound. It was the kind of night that used to tighten something in Lena's chest. Late shifts, delayed buses, promises tested by circumstances. But this time, Lena was home. She stood at the window, watching rain trace slow paths down the glass, while Ivy sat on the floor building a tower from mismatched blocks. Ethan was in the kitchen, stirring soup, the rhythm unhurried. No one was waiting for anyone else to return. That realization landed softly, almost unnoticed, until Ivy spoke. "Is this a night where people don't have to go anywhere?" she asked. "Yes," Lena said. "Everyone's here." Ivy smiled and added another block to the tower. The power flickered once, then steadied. The lights stayed on. Ethan brought the soup to the table and sat without being asked. Ivy climbed into her chair, feet dangling. "Do storms still count as emergencies?" Ivy asked. "They can," Ethan said. but only if no one knows where they are. And we know, Ivy said confidently. They ate in comfortable silence, the sound of rain filling the spaces words didn't need to occupy. Later, as Ivy brushed her teeth, Lena leaned against the counter beside Ethan. This would have scared me before she admitted. A night like this. Ethan nodded. Me too. Not the storm, the responsibility. And now it feels shared. That was the difference. When Ivy was tucked into bed, she asked for a story not about waiting, but about building. Lena began, and Ethan finished it without planning to. Their voices overlapped, not competing, just aligning. As Ivy drifted off, she reached for Ethan's sleeve. You don't have to stay up, she murmured. I know, he said. But I will. After the lights were out, Ethan sat alone in the living room for a moment, listening to the rain soften. He thought about how often he had needed proof documents, confirmations, outcomes. Tonight offered none of that. No milestones, no signatures, no visible progress, and yet it felt complete. Lena joined him with 2 mugs of tea, handing him one. We didn't fix anything today, she said. We didn't need to, Ethan replied. Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, the apartment held steady, warm, and quiet. For the first time since Ethan had noticed a child beneath a broken clock, he understood something fully. Love didn't need to announce itself. Safety didn't need to be dramatic. Family didn't need proof every day. Some nights it was enough that no one had to be brave, no one had to wait, and nothing had to be proven at all. The rain had washed the city clean by morning. Sunlight slipped through the curtains softer than usual, as if it had learned how to enter the apartment without asking for attention. Ivy woke first. She lay still for a moment, listening not for footsteps or doors, but for the quiet certainty that everyone she needed was already there. She smiled. In the kitchen, Lena was making breakfast. Ethan stood nearby, sleeves rolled up, reading the instructions on a box of pancake mix, as if it were a legal document. Why does it need so many steps? He asked. So people don't rush, Lena said. That's the point. Ivy patted in and climbed onto her chair. Are we late? No, Lena said immediately. We're right on time. That answer mattered more than she realized. After breakfast, they walked together, now a familiar ritual. Ivy between them, backpack bouncing lightly with each step. At the corner where the street opened toward the station, Ivy stopped. That way, she said, pointing. That's where the clock is. Yes, Ethan said. Ivy tilted her head. Do we need to go there again? Lena crouched beside her. Only if you want to. Ivy thought carefully. She pictured the platform, the echoing space, the clock that had once held her whole world in place. No, she said finally. I remember it. That's enough. They turned the other way. At school, Ivy ran ahead without looking back. Lena and Ethan stood watching until the doors closed behind her. She didn't check, Lena whispered. Ethan nodded. She knows. Later that day, Ethan met with his attorney not to file anything new, but to close a chapter. Emergency documents were finalized. Guardianship terms reaffirmed. Everything in order, everything calm. No urgency remained. That evening, Ivy came home with a flyer. Family Day, she announced. They want parents. Lena hesitated. Then she smiled. We can go. Ivy looked at Ethan. You too, Ethan answered without rushing. If that's okay with both of you, it is, Ivy said simply. That night, as Ivy worked on homework at the table, she glanced up at the wall clock in the living room. Does that one work? She asked. Yes, Ethan said. Perfectly. She nodded, then went back to writing. The clock kept time, but it no longer defined it. As the apartment settled into evening, Ethan realized the broken clock at the station had finally lost its power, not because it was fixed, but because it was no longer needed. Time had moved on, and this time it had taken all 3 of them with it together, unafraid and no longer counting minutes to feel safe. Family day arrived without ceremony. No special clothes, no rehearsed explanations. Lena took the morning off. Ethan adjusted his schedule without announcing it. Ivy packed her backpack carefully, sliding the flyer inside as if it were something fragile. At the school, the hallway buzzed with familiar chaos. Parents greeting teachers, children tugging at sleeves, laughter echoing off painted walls. Ivy walked between Lena and Ethan, her steps light, unhurried. No one stared. That surprised Lena more than anything else. In the classroom, Ivy introduced them simply. "This is my mom," she said, pointing proudly. "And this is Ethan." The teacher smiled and nodded, writing both names on the contact sheet without pause. No labels were requested. No clarifications demanded. They sat at a small table while Ivy showed them her projects, drawings, short stories, a timeline of important days. Ethan noticed something missing. There was no clock. Later, during a group activity, Ivy was asked to draw her family. She didn't look around for cues. She didn't hesitate. She drew 3 figures standing side by side. Above them, she added a sun, not a clock, not a building, not a place. Just light. Lena felt her throat tighten. Ethan rested his hand lightly on the back of Ivy's chair, steady and present. When it was time to leave, Ivy ran ahead to say goodbye to a friend. "See," Lena said quietly. "She's not explaining herself anymore." "That's confidence," Ethan replied. "It comes from being believed." As they walked home, Ivy skipped along the sidewalk, humming to herself. "Did I do it right?" she asked suddenly. "Do what Lena asked. Family day." Ethan answered first. "There's no wrong way to be seen." Ivy nodded, satisfied. That evening, Lena pinned Ivy's drawing to the refrigerator. It joined the others' maps, stories, moments that no longer carried urgency. From the kitchen, Ethan watched them, realizing something profound. They hadn't just built a family. They had allowed the world to recognize it quietly, without resistance, without spectacle. And in that recognition, something settled. The need to explain. The need to prove. The need to wait. None of it remained. They were simply there, together. And that at last was enough. The evening was ordinary in the best possible way. Dinner dishes dried on the rack. Ivy lay on the floor, surrounded by books. She had no intention of finishing, tracing shapes in the air with one finger as she thought. Lena folded laundry at the table, the quiet rhythm familiar and calming. Ethan watched them both, not as an observer anymore, but as someone woven into the scene. At some point, Ivy sat up and looked at him. "You know," she said casually, "you never said you'd stay forever." Lena paused, heart-catching. Ethan met Ivy's eyes. He didn't rush to answer. "You're right," he said. "I didn't." Ivy nodded, accepting that. "But you keep coming back." "Yes," Ethan said softly. "I do." "That's better." Ivy decided, returning to her books. Lena exhaled, a small smile forming. Later, as Ivy brushed her teeth, Lena leaned against the counter beside Ethan. "She notices consistency more than promises," Lena said. Ethan nodded. "So do I." When Ivy climbed into bed, she pulled the blanket up and reached out. Lena took one hand. Ethan took the other. No speech followed. No reassurance was required. Ivy drifted to sleep between 2 steady presences. Her breathing evening out, her face relaxed in a way that no clock could measure. Afterward, Ethan stood at the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. He realized then that the promise he was keeping wasn't one he had spoken. It was the promise of showing up tomorrow, and the day after that, and the days no one would notice because nothing was wrong. In the living room, the clock ticked softly. No one listened to it. Time was no longer something they feared or followed. It was something they shared quietly, naturally, without ever having to say the word forever. A year passed without anyone counting it. Seasons changed outside the apartment windows. Winter giving way to spring, spring warming into summer, but inside life moved with an ease that would have once felt impossible. Ivy grew taller. Her questions grew braver. Her silences no longer carried weight. One afternoon, they walked past the old train station together. The building looked smaller than Ivy remembered, less important. The clock above platform 4 was still there, ticking steadily now, almost eager to be useful again. Ivy stopped. Lena waited. Ethan stayed still. Ivy looked up at the clock for a long moment, then smiled, not sadly, not nostalgically, just knowingly. "Thank you," she said quietly. To the clock, Ethan asked gently. To waiting, Ivy replied. "It taught me how to trust." They walked on. That evening, they sat on the balcony sharing ice cream as the city lights came on one by one. Ivy leaned against Ethan's side without thinking. Lena rested her head briefly on his shoulder, then laughed at herself. "Look at us," she said. "So serious." Ethan smiled. "We earned it." Later, as Ivy prepared for bed, she pulled the small box from beneath her bed and took out the old note, the one that had once held her world together. She read it once more, then placed it back. Not because she needed it, because it belonged to her story. She slid the box into a drawer, closed it gently, and turned off the light. In the living room, Ethan and Lena sat quietly, hands linked. "We didn't plan this," Lena said. No, Ethan agreed. We respected it. Outside, time moved on, indifferent and steady. Inside, a family had formed not from rescue or urgency, but from patience, consent, and presence. There was no grand declaration. No final promise spoken aloud. Just a place where doors opened, lights stayed on, and no child stood alone beneath a broken clock anymore. A place where no one waited, and that was the ending. Not because the story stopped, but because it had finally learned how to stay. Did this story touch your heart? Let us know how you felt. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments below. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss our next heartfelt story. Click the end screen to watch more emotional journeys. See you in the next one.